Today I want to continue with the books that were written by Crisis Coalition in Zimbabwe. So in my line of work, I meet a lot of people that have been abducted, tortured, or arrested in Zimbabwe. And often the stories are so difficult to listen to that I get tired. When just listening to the person, I feel like leaving everything and just leaving Zimbabwe to take care of itself. Because some of the things that happen to people in Zimbabwe is unbelievable. So this book, Cries from Goromonzi, this is from Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition. It shows a number of very difficult stories of torture, abduction, and even murder. And some of the people are very well-known people. And I want to illustrate some of the things that happened in Zimbabwe with military intelligence, military and CIO abducting people. And this whole book has got about 23 stories, but I want to run through a few of the stories just to illustrate to you how bad the situation is or the situation was. And this is not just something that happened in the past. Only about 2 months ago, I met someone who was living in South Africa, who was caught up in the crossfire in Harare at Harvest House, whilst counting the votes or tallying the votes. And they were arrested and thrown into jail for over 6 months on trumped up charges. When they got back to South Africa, they'd lost their job, their family was destitute, they'd lost the place where they were living, and the young man was bitter. When I looked at him, he was not even willing to come on camera and talk about his story. But these are recorded stories which we have in this particular booklet. For example, you take the story of Honorable Paul Madzore, Member of Parliament for Glenview. Soldiers came to his house, kicked down the door, and he was arrested and thrown into jail or remand prison for 6 months. And all this was because he was being accused of being a mastermind of the Democratic Resistance Committee. So a lot of the stories in this book relate to that investigation. Job Scala, he was arrested and taken to military intelligence, was tortured, and he was fed an unspecified liquid which burned his tongue. Because of this, he was on the run for 6 months, and his parents in the rural areas were beaten. So this was one of the things that is very common in this book. A lot of beating of innocent people, children, parents. And this is done by a national army, this is done by police, this is done by security forces who are not supposed to be anywhere near political activities. But you could clearly see that the police, the military in Zimbabwe was biased against the MDC, was working for ZANU-PF, was behaving like a law unto themselves. There's here another story of Beta Chokururama. Very sad story, which happened when these guys were traveling to Murewa. The people in that car were Tedious Chimedza, Beta Chokururama, and Godfrey Kauzani. These guys were blocked about 20 kilometers between Harare and Murewa, and Chokururama and Kauzani were shot and killed on the spot, whilst Chimedza survived. Beta Chokururama's body was found in a rural village near Goromonzi, And this was after some time. When they tried to bury him in the rural villages of Mrewa, ZANU-PF prevented them from burying them in that area. The family had to leave the area, and after the burial, they were living in destitution in Harare. And all this was done by suspected military intelligence. Let's go to Luke Tamborinyoka. Luke Tamborinyoka was arrested. They came to his house and they took him. So they took him first to Harare Central Police Station, and the number was 300. So there were 300 people, but it ended up with 7 people. They were beaten very, very thoroughly. And then Luke Tamborinyoka was taken to, so after the beating, Luke Tamborinyoka was taken to Avenues Clinic. And when he got to Avenues Clinic, at night, the police came, removed all the drips, and took them back to jail. So this was terrible treatment taken from hospital by the police. Almost no rule of law in Zimbabwe because the security services, the security forces are so politicized. Let's look at the story of Tonderai Ndira. Tonderai Ndira was abducted in front of his family while sleeping, and he was abducted by about 10 armed men. And these men took him away, and he was never seen again by his family until his wife went to Goromonzi police station, where she was told that a body had been discovered. Apparently, Tonderai Ndira's body had been dumped in the bushes, and he was found basically near decomposition. So this is one of the very sad stories. We also have the story of Ian Makone, Raymond Majongwe. We've got the story of Mary Pamire. I want to talk a bit about this story of Mary Pamire. Mary Pamire is the first woman I'm talking about here. She was taken while it's coming from the funeral of Lenmo Jongwe, and she was taken by the soldiers. They also gang raped her. And the sad thing about Mary Pamela is that she was infected with HIV. So they infected her with HIV. Whoever raped her in the military infected her with HIV. We also have the story here of Kerina Dewa, who was beaten up at home, and her husband, who was also beaten up at home. Most of these people here were assaulted. They were not given due process. And when some of the people managed to sue the military, they won in court, but there was no payment of the compensation. So although the court ordered for them to be paid, there was no compensation. This is important because the MDC was in a GNU with ZANU-PF when these orders were given. But the MDC failed to get payment for these people. So this is very, very sad. And then we have Rutendo Munengami. Rutendo Munengami was a wife of a councillor. So I think this was a councillor in Glenview. And when they found that the husband was not there, the soldiers that came there, they found that the husband was not there. They raped her in front of a 9-month-old and 2-year-old child. So this is the book. Some people have paid the ultimate price. Some people have lost everything. They've had to move their houses because of the behavior of the security forces. I am saying this story because this is still happening as we speak right now. As I was saying in the beginning of this video, I have someone who has lost everything this year. They have lost their job, they've lost their family, They're destitute because they were arrested on trumped-up charges. So, very interesting series of books. Crisis in Zimbabwe Coalition. They're doing a good job. Obviously, there were people who have been subjected to the same treatment. Nelson Chamisa was beaten at the airport. Ian Makone was beaten at the airport. And you know the story of Tendai Biti, the story of Morgan Tsvangirai, beaten, abducted, Lovemo Maduku, people who, with impunity, were beaten up by security forces. So, security forces in Zimbabwe, military intelligence, CIO, they are presenting a very big problem, a very big political problem for transition to democracy, because it's not clear if they are being ordered or if they are just acting because the environment is lawless. It's also not clear if it's the green bombers, it's the soldiers, it's the CIO. So this lack of identity, which person is in which area, is a big stumbling block for people who now want to report, for victims who want to report this kind of criminal activities. Some people have been infected with HIV, as I've said here. Some people have lost their lives. Some people have lost their livelihoods. It's very difficult to understand why in this day and age, politics in Zimbabwe is so toxic, is so violent. And the question arises, what should you do as a member of the MDC, as the member of the opposition? What would I suggest to you to do if you find yourself in a position where you're facing arrest, where you're facing detention, where you're facing abduction? My suggestion would be, if you're able to leave Zimbabwe as soon as possible, because the army in Zimbabwe, the military intelligence, CIO, they're basically running the place. So if you find that you're in danger, the situation is not safe for you, do not stand around. Move out of that environment and try to find yourself a safe place. If this kind of thing can happen to well-known leaders of the MDC, imagine a normal person that has got no protection, that has got no lawyers, that cannot go to hospitals. So this is the second book, Cries from Goromonzi, Inside Zimbabwe's Torture Chambers. And the most painful thing is that the people who perpetrated these kind of atrocities are walking free in Zimbabwe. Nothing has happened to them. They have not been prosecuted. I've been speaking a lot about these kind of things. And these people are walking free. This is one of the most difficult things for the victims. There is no recourse. And I don't know how it's going to turn out, but most of the people in this book, most of the victims, are requesting that instead of just having an organ on healing and reconciliation, there should instead be a truth-telling commission. There should be some sort of compensation for victims of violence. Right, tomorrow I'm going to read the last book, which was written by the MDC. I'll show you a few pictures. I'll summarize for you a bit of data. Very toxic politics in Zimbabwe. Right, thank you very much for watching. Please like, comment and share on this post. Like our Facebook page and subscribe to the new Gambakwe Media YouTube channel.